Hello friends, Matt here with Donec Requiescat. Please subscribe and share with your friends. Today I'm going to be talking about the first of St. Thomas Aquinas' proofs for the existence of God, sometimes known as the 5 ways. As a general guide, I recommend Matt Fradd and Robert Delfino's book, Does God Exist? The first argument is known as the argument from motion. And the first thing to know about this argument is that motion for Thomas Aquinas doesn't just mean movement like changing locations in space and time, but what he means is change, any type of change that takes place. So changing location certainly is a type of change, right? Motion as we know it. But also he means, changing state, being painted some different color. And all this relates to the 10 categories of Aristotle, right? He had these different categories of things that can be used to describe something and that make something what it is. So here we're referring to the same thing, one thing that is remaining what it is and is changing. Something turning into something else, that's a different argument. The fact that things change is very obvious to us. This is why Thomas Aquinas says that this is the most manifest way, because it deals with the piece of data, the piece of information that is the most obvious to us, that things undergo change. And so whenever something changes, it has the potential to be something, but it's not. And then that potential that it has is made actual. So it goes from potentiality to actuality. And that's what Thomas Aquinas means when he says that change is nothing but potentiality being reduced to actuality. Right? And so, for example, this screen has the potential to be color inverted, like this, right? But now it's not anymore. Right? Once it is color inverted, then that color inversion potentiality becomes an actuality. And this whole relationship between actuality and potentiality is really important for these 5 ways, and it's important for an overall understanding of the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas. And I would say is important for an understanding of the nature of reality as well. And so we notice that in order for something to undergo change, to go from potential to actual, then there has to be something else involved. Nothing is able to actualize its own potential completely on its own. There's always something else involved, some other entity. But whenever we look at that other thing that is actualizing the potential, then we see that that thing also is undergoing change of some kind. And so therefore that needs something else to be actualizing its potential. It's important to realize here too that we're not just talking about physical causes. We're talking about metaphysics, being, existence of things, not just physical causes that can be described by physics and chemistry. The existence of something is not something explained by physics. Right? Physics can describe it, and it can describe characteristics, measurable physical quantities, but the existence and the actuality of the thing itself and its attributes is not something that's just subject to mere physical laws. So let's take an example. A hand moves a stick. Right? And so the stick is changing location. How is it doing that? By the hand. And how is the hand moving? It also is changing. How? By the muscles being clenched. And how are the muscles being changed? Because they are being activated by the nerves. And how are the nerves changing? The nerves are being activated by the brain, and the brain is being activated by sense data coming in from light, and the light is being activated by the fire, whatever it might be. And then in the fire, what's actualizing the fire? Small subatomic changes that are taking place with electrons as molecules slam together. And then what is actualizing those electrons? And what is actualizing those subatomic particles? And we can even look at that whole chain of causes and break it down at any point. We could look at the brain and say, well, the brain is being actualized by sense data, but that change is also taking place because of these electrochemical interactions that are happening in the brain, but that's also happening because of the skull, which is supporting the brain. Right? There are lots of causes in any one actualization that's taking place. And what we get down to in the end is some actualization, something that exists, that has actuality, that doesn't explain its own actuality. We get down to something that is still itself changing, and thus needs a changer. One of the important things to realize is that we're not talking about a regress in time. All of these things are happening at the same moment. Thomas Aquinas wasn't arguing from a beginning point in time. Right? That's a common misunderstanding, and is one of the misunderstandings that Richard Dawkins suffers from in his critique in The God Delusion. We're talking about things that are happening at the same time, right? A single instant in time where there are these connected causes. And so when we get back to this whatever object we're looking at that is the initial point in the chain of causes, even that thing is itself changing, right? And there has to be something actualizing that change. And so we need some principle of actuality. And we invoke the principle of causality, that the effect cannot be greater than the cause. This is the fundamental principle of all of science and all of philosophy as well. Now, if all we have is dependent causes, things that are all dependent on other things, then all those things are dependent and none of them are necessary. And none of them have the power to bring themselves into existence or to make themselves actual. And so when we get down, there has to be a first principle, a first actualizing principle that is itself not changing. And because if it's changing, then it needs another principle, then it needs a changer, and is itself dependent. And then we get back to this infinite regress again. The reason there's a problem with the regress is not because of physical causes, but because of the nature of existence, and that the effect cannot be greater than the cause. And so that means there must be some first changer, some unmoved mover, some pure actuality that is not undergoing any change, that is able to actualize everything else, that is able to be a source of actualization in everything else. Right? That thing itself has to be pure actuality, because if it had any potential, that would mean that there's some way in which it is not, that it then could change into. And then there's change taking place, and then we get back to the infinite regress again. And so that thing is unchanging. Since there's no change, there is no time, because what's time but keeping track of change of some sort? And it is the essence of existingness itself. It is pure actuality. Dawkins's critique of God being omniscient and omnipotent is based on this time principle. But as we can see, this source of actuality doesn't have time. Right? It is an atemporal thing. And so here's the summary. Things change from potentiality to actuality. Something else is necessary to bring about that actuality. Even that thing is changing, and so it depends on something else for it to be made actual. If this causal chain goes on forever, everything is dependent for actuality on everything else. If everything is dependent, nothing would have the actuality. There must be a first cause of actuality as the first source of all actuality. The first cause cannot be changing, otherwise it would need a cause too. The first cause then is pure, unchanging actuality. Pure, unchanging, atemporal actuality, the very essence of existingness itself, fits perfectly with the theologically and philosophically rigorous idea of God. And so that's why when Thomas Aquinas comes to this point, he's justified in calling that thing God. I hope this was informational for you. I plan on making 4 more videos on the other proofs for the existence of God. Please subscribe and share with your friends.